Hi booktube, it's CMF 1267 or Connie. So I'm moving on now with my books. I think I'm on book 16. Yeah, 16 through 20 today. So number 16 that I read this year was really big. Everyone was talking about it last year. It was one of the nominees for Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction, and that was Stay With Me by Ayabami Adebayo. And I think this is one of those cases where I had really high expectations and the book just did not live up to my expectations. I also, as usual, listened to this on, I listened to the audiobook, and the audiobook was narrated by Joa Ando. The book takes place in Nigeria, and all I had heard about it was that it was about a woman who had difficulties getting pregnant, and how society judges women who can't get pregnant, and that there was so much more to this book than that. And I know that people probably didn't want to give a lot away, and I don't want to give a lot away, so I'm just gonna say there's more to it than just the fact that she can't get pregnant, because there's actually a little surprise in that as to what actually happens. So even if you read like the first blurb in the book, it tells you that, Yajiri is hoping for a miracle for a child. It is all her husband wants. So you think that that's what this is about. But if you read the second part of the blurb that they give you, it goes on to tell you that there's so much more to this book than that. It deals with grief and with loss and with loyalty, and yes, how women are viewed by society as wives, as mothers, and just as women in general. I will say that listening to the audiobook, that the narrator did have, she didn't change her voice enough to when she was reading Yajiri and her husband, Akin. So at times, listening to the audiobook, I was a little bit confused as to who was talking. It would take me a minute to catch up on it, and that may have been part of the reason why I just didn't enjoy this book as much as I had hoped I would. I have read other reviewers who have said that they felt that way while reading the book, that the voices of Akin and Yajiri were just a little bit too similar, that you felt like you were reading the same person. Another thing that I have difficulty with, this book takes place in Nigeria, and although I know that other countries, part of why I'm a reader is that I want to get stories from other parts of the world that I will probably never visit. I think it makes us more empathetic as human beings to understand the plights of other people and other societies. I do still have difficulty, though, by reading stories about countries where women are really thought of as second-class citizens, where polygamy is still practiced, and that's just my thing. I kind of have to get over that difficulty, and I'm going to talk about that a little more in another book that I read this month. But yeah, I gave this a 3-star reading. It was probably closer to like 3.5, 3.75 stars, but it really wasn't a 4-star book for me. Unfortunately, Goodreads doesn't let us do the half or quarter-star ratings. So I did enjoy the book, I just didn't enjoy it as much as I hoped that I would. The next book I read was Winter by Allie Smith, and this was narrated by Melody Grove, because again, I also listened to the audiobook. I gave this 2 stars. I don't know if I'm an Allie Smith reader. So I didn't love Autumn. I actually liked the story in Autumn better than this story, but I'm not sure. But I think maybe Allie Smith just goes over my head. There were topical issues here that she addressed, but then she would take issues back all the way back to like World War II, and I wasn't sure if she was trying to say that some of the issues that we have today started back in World War II, or if she was trying to link things like the anti-immigration problems that we're having, the pollution and destruction of the earth, if she was trying to link those back to having, say, that, it goes all the way back to, the thinking that we had back in the World War II era, and like what we saw with Brexit and the election of Trump, and these people coming up saying, well, we just want things to go back to the way they were, or whatever. So I wasn't sure if she was trying to make that connection. The two main characters on here were pretty unlikable, and they were pretty cold people as far as their personalities were concerned, pretty unforgiving. I'm not sure if that was her metaphor, if she created those characters as a metaphor for winter, the title of the book. And then there was like this whole kind of like, I don't know if it was really magical realism or what it was. There were some issues with these two characters seeing things that weren't actually there, and I just didn't really get the whole point of that. So, but I may be glutton for punishment. I did give Winter 2 stars. I may be glutton for punishment because for some reason I want to know what she's going to do with Spring. But we'll see if I actually decide to read that or not. The next book I read was a book called Martin Martin, which was written by Brian Doyle. And again, I listened to the audiobook. The audiobook was narrated by Travis Baldree. He did an okay job, not anything spectacular. This book, it's a children's book or a YA novel. I don't even know where I saw it discussed. I think maybe I saw it discussed as one of the best books that they read last year, or something like that. Martin Martin follows Dave, a 14-year-old boy living in the mountains of Oregon, and he's getting ready to start high school. So his life is changing. He's becoming a man and getting ready to go off to high school. And then we follow Martin, the Pine Martin. Never heard of Pine Martins before, but they're awfully cute, and it's on the cover of the book. Martin, the Pine Martin, has just been born, and he's in the story getting ready to leave his mother's nest, the nest that he shared with his mother and his sister, and go off on his own. So there's kind of like this parallel lives between Martin the Pine Martin and Dave the boy. It was an okay book. I didn't think it was anything spectacular. I do think that maybe the author is a big hunter or trapper. He seemed to defend those things a little bit in the book, which I don't have a problem with people hunting if they need it for food, but I do have a bit of a problem with trophy hunting, but that's my own thing. But he did seem to go off on tangents a couple times in the book. I think what didn't work for me in this book is that I wanted more of the Martin and Dave parallels, and I felt like really this book centered around this town up in the mountains of Oregon, and he tried to put quirky characters in there, but I didn't find them quirky. I didn't find them that funny. There were a couple that were okay, but I was more interested in that storyline between Martin the Pine Martin and Dave the boy. And Dave's little sister is really cute in this as well, and I can't remember that character's name, but she's probably the only quirky character that I really liked in the book. But yeah, so I'm a big fan of Frederick Backman, who I think does quirky characters great. So if authors try and put that in there, if they're not as good as Frederick Backman's, I'm probably not going to be that impressed with it. But Martin, I gave just 2 stars too. It was an okay book, not anything to write home about. The next book I read, I have had on my shelves for probably 10 years. And I've been wanting to read this book, and it was Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Adichie Adichie. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I have been wanting to read this book for a long time. Unfortunately, this is the other Nigerian book that I just felt didn't quite live up to my expectations. The story is really kind of a coming-of-age novel of our protagonist, Kambili, who is a young 14-year-old girl living at home with her father, mother, and brother in Nigeria. Her father is very strict and abusive. He's very religious and he was raised in the Catholic Church in Nigeria instead of practicing the religion of his father, which was the old religion in Nigeria. Her father has very strong views about everything. People who, his own father, who does not practice Catholicism, and he considers him a heathen. But we get the story of Kambili, and she goes off at one point to spend time with, she and her brother Jaja go to live with their aunt, who has several kids, and their life is very different. The aunt is a widow. She's raising her kids on her own. She is a professor at the university. She has very little money, whereas Kambili's father has a lot of money. And she gets this life, though, with her aunt that she doesn't experience at home. A really loving home that encourages the children to speak out and speak up and speak their minds, which is something that she does not get at home. They are expected to be quiet and only speak when spoken to type of a situation. They live their lives walking on eggshells, not sure when their father is going to blow up. So what didn't work for me in this book was Kambili, in probably the first half, maybe even more than the first half of this book, really got on my nerves. As far as I understand that the author was bringing her up and saying, this girl has been raised in this environment where she walks on eggshells, and so she doesn't feel like she can speak, and at first, she says throughout the book, the first part of the book, many, many times, like, oh, I wanted to say this to this person, but I didn't. I wanted to get in the car with such and such, but I didn't. I wanted to say that to my dad, but I didn't. And it got to a point where I just, rolled my eyes every time I knew a situation was coming up where she was going to say something like that. And it's like, please don't make her say that. And she'd say it. So, I do think that the story picked up in the second half of the book. I did give the book 3 stars, which is, I enjoyed it. It just didn't live up to my expectations. I really wanted to love the book, and it just really didn't do it for me. And again, I had also listened to the audiobook, and I want to give the narrator credit. It was narrated by Lisette Lacat. She did an okay job. Nothing that spectacular, but again, the book was 3 stars for me. I enjoyed it, but it just didn't live up to the hype and what I was hoping for. I will say that the ending, I wasn't expecting the ending. The whole last little, not even quarter of the book, less than quarter of the book. I was kind of surprised by that, but like I said, the second half of the book picked up. And book number 20 this year is a book that I was really wanting to read. It was nominated for the Man Booker Prize last year in 2017, and it is Solar Bones by Mike McCormick. This book takes place in Ireland. I also listened to the audiobook, and it was narrated by Tim Gerard Reynolds, who I do think did a fantastic job on this book. One of the things that people have been saying is, this is a one-sentence book, and it's like 265. The edition I have is 265 pages. And it's one long run-on sentence. It doesn't mean that it's one sentence, actually. It's just there's 0 punctuation in this book. But I enjoyed this book. This is a book about Marcus Conway, who is flashing back through his life. He's sitting at his kitchen table and he's going through his life. It's written completely in a stream of consciousness. He's reflecting on his life with his wife and his children, on his life with his parents, on the things that his parents went through, on death, on politics, on all of these things that happened in his life and affected him. And this is where I think the narrator was absolutely fantastic. I mean, he did a really good job of this book. And so as with the rest of the books that I've listened to or read this year, it's really told in a non-linear fashion. You get a lot of flashbacks with Marcus going back through his life at different periods. He might be in 1986 in one period, and then he comes back to present day where his wife has contracted a virus and he's been taking care of her. It did have me wondering from the beginning as to, okay, why is Marcus having these reflections? You do get hints throughout the book as to why Marcus is having these reflections, which I kind of figured out pretty early on, but I enjoyed this book. I thought it was great character development. I really liked Marcus for the most part. I liked the reflections back on his life. I love books that take place in Ireland, and in particular, we had a nice Irish brogue with the narrator. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed Solar Bones, and I think I gave it 4 stars. And I think that's it. That's books 11 through 20. So I'll be back later with 21 through 25. Have a great weekend. Bye.